Hello and welcome back to another episode of TBD Tech News. This is episode 3. Today we will be covering how AI copyright laws could make the whole industry go extinct, Texas's experiment to fix post-pandemic math crisis, and first U.S. moon landing since 1972 as private spacecraft successfully reaches lunar surface. So we'll jump on into it. The very first article we have deals with the potential extinction of AI large language learning models and generative AI because of copyright laws. Essentially, what the argument against AI states is because they've been trained on all the other material on the internet, including other artists' work, other writers, video makers, it is actually a form of copyright infringement to have the AI use those use those works to create new works. First of all, I just want to rip the band-aid off. What do you think? Is generative AI copyright infringement in your opinion?
Um, well, that's the thing. Generative AI. So if you're talking about basically like making a new video, I would say no. So if, for instance, where like you have like Biden and Friends, if you've seen that,
Oh
I would
yeah.
say that's not. Even though maybe it's probably taking stuff from like CNN and all that. But it brought up a really good point that like if something is like literally paywalled, like a piece of text, and an LLM just reproduces that exact article if you ask it to, then that I would say is definitely uh, that's copyright infringement for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I would personally be willing to be like, you know what, let's give AI an exception because it's like one of the few things right now that's actually like I would say super innovative.
Yeah, I guess the comparison that I make is if I, as an artist, watch all of a director's movies or listen to all of Martin Scorsese's film music, and I try my best to recreate something in that style, nobody would argue that I have infringed his copyright because it's a person doing it. But as
Yeah.
soon as you have an AI do that exact same thing, the argument's open. And I think that's an interesting distinction to be made. And I definitely understand why it's a gray area because it feels different. It almost feels like the human touch is out of it. However, I would argue that the human touch is in it just as much, just not in the same way. I mean, it was a human that wrote those models. It was the brainchild of a person to create those
But then
models.
my question to you then is, so what should we do? So should we kill off this nascent industry
I
because of this, or like is it just, oh look, our law says this, so we should kill it, or should we question whether or not the law should maybe have an exception?
and that is the question I asked myself the entire time listening to this, and I didn't come up with a clear answer. I think it. I mean, it boils down to the four pillars of free use that always come up when you discuss copyright. Those already are kind of a vibe check. So the, I mean, I guess personally, I think that we need to grant a pass at least temporarily to let these exist because it it seems absurd to me to kill off this technology in its infancy for this issue. I understand the complaints. People are worried about their livelihoods as artists because an AI can come in and kind of do what they do without the years of training per se. But I think it's absurd to kill off the industry. I guess is where I fall in the end. The middle area, it's good. I mean,
Yeah, we got to hit the backlog, man.
yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there's just it's definitely a very complicated uh, issue that we're facing here. Um, if we do jump forward, we can come back to this if we deem fit. I'll let you take this one away.
Yeah, so what you're seeing right here is basically a little article I found. Uh, about how Texas was having a math crisis because of COVID. They found that basically the number of students who were mastering their STAR exam in Texas, which is basically like their yearly assessment of student performance, went down significantly. And they tried an experiment, which you're kind of seeing here, called Eureka Math. And in that experiment, they try to use collaborative ways to get the students to work together to explain what they did. And another cool thing about it is like it's dynamic in the sense that a teacher will kind of not really formally test them by giving them like a paper or something to go and like write answers on, but they'll like ask students questions to like figure out what they know about a subject prior to
Hmm.
teaching it, and then they'll teach dynamically after that, and then have the kids explain like why they thought some things to start the lesson. Um,
Okay, so essentially, I mean, I remember taking pretests as a kiddo, but I didn't feel like it had much impact on the curriculum most times. It was like, what do you
yeah,
know? And then we were taught the same thing. I aced some pretests. I blew on some pretests. Regardless, the class got taught at the same pace each time. So, have, is this a brand new introduction that is still in its infancy, or has this been tried for a year, 6 months? How long is this
yeah, it's
program?
in its infancy. They actually don't even have test data on it, so they're looking to see like if the next year when they get their star results back for the students, whether or not this is working.
Hmm. And what month of the year will those star results come out? Do you know?
I'm not exactly
Yeah.
sure. We
It.
got hit the
I. I think it. I mean, to me, this sounds like common sense. Like, if you take a pretest, it should have an impact on the lesson. Like, I feel like this is almost how teaching should have been done originally. Is that a thought that you echo?
Yeah, I definitely think that you're kind of right on that. Like it makes it makes a lot of sense when you put it that way. Um, but I can see where like if you're just taught a certain way, that they would just kind of go with the traditional method. You know what I mean? Like if you don't think about it as being something that should be dynamic, then it's probably what they were just doing to assess whether or not the student actually learned something. So they used a baseline and then they did something after,
Okay.
and then said, "Oh, you know what I mean?"
Yeah, I mean, for all I know, the pretest that I took might have had an impact, but because when you have a class of 30, you can't really teach to the most advanced student. You kind of have to go at the slowest pace, otherwise you're just leaving kids behind, which I think most people would argue is not an acceptable way of teaching. Um, so I see how it might not actually have that big of an impact. That being said, I do think there's a reason standardized curriculums exist where you teach this, you spend this much time on it, you move to the next one, and I think there's definitely adjustments that can be made to that. But I think that there is definitely something to that where teachers, don't get me wrong, some teachers are amazing and can absolutely work on the fly and improvise. They're like, oh man, my students know this and this and this. I can modify my lesson plan this way. But I also think there's some very lazy teachers out there that rely on the standard curriculum, lean on it, and say, this is what I'm teaching. I'm just going off what, I have this step, then this step, then this step, and I don't, they take the easy road almost. So I could see how this would be extremely beneficial for those teachers who want a more proactive stance, getting involved, teaching the kids exactly what they need to know, not wasting time. But almost as if, like I said, when you teach to the slowest student in the class, you almost have to make the curriculum for the slowest teachers of the bunch. Um, maybe that's just a naive opinion from someone who's only experienced teaching is as a student, but um, I guess in this program, is it just targeting math right now, or is it you know uh, branching out into the entire curriculum?
I'm not entirely sure. It makes it seem like it's math specific.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. And is this specifically for younger kids, or is this K through 12, the entire spectrum?
It doesn't say in the article whether or not it's a full spectrum,
Okay.
but it seemed more like it's a thing for younger kids because it's talking about basically they're supposed to explain their reasoning to each other, how that's one of the bigger struggles actually for them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's indicating like basically their like explanation skills aren't really there. Like
Okay.
they're fighting that issue as well.
Yeah. Definitely an interesting strategy. I'm very interested to see how it plays out once those star grades come out. Moving on, we for the final article covered today. This is an article I'm actually very passionate about. It kind of tees off what I discussed in episode 1. I was so hyped to see it that we're recording this on Thursday, February 22nd. That's an important date because when I first read this article that I'm linking to, its title was "First U.S. Moon Landing Since 1972 Set to Happen Today as Spacecraft Closes in on Lunar Surface." And in the time since I read this morning, got all fired up and started looking into it, and putting this presentation together, the title has actually changed to "First Successful Moon Landing since 1972." So it actually, at around 5:45, this lander actually touched down on the moon. I watched it live. It was very exciting. But a couple things to note that I kind of want to steer our discussion with on this is in the article. It toes a delicate line of saying this is an accomplishment for all of mankind, while also saying America has once again asserted its dominance, and this is the first private company or private space lander to touch the moon, which to me almost makes it a capitalist economy. This is a private entity doing this, almost as a continuation to the original space race, where it was America and the freedom there versus the more state-sponsored or state-run communist Soviet Union. So it very clearly hammered home, like, this is America, this is a private entity, but also a global partnership. So I think the dynamics there are definitely interesting, kind of flexing on our less privatized counterparts across the globe. I think it has potentially some interesting ramifications. If we have privatization of space, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Should space be for all? A lot of questions it brings up, but regardless, very, very exciting. We made it to the moon again.
So what company actually did this?
Yeah, so the company that did this was Intuitive Machines. Sorry, Intuitive Machines was the company that landed on it, and in the article they stress Intuitive Machines, SpaceX as the rocket that launched it, and NASA as the government body that ties it to America and our overall greatness.
We've never heard anything about this company before. Like I feel like
That is an excellent question, and one that I asked myself. The first that I heard of this was earlier in this week, when it was like, oh, it should be taking place later this week. It's in, it took off a week ago. But yeah, for a relatively no-name company a no-name to me, of course, definitely not in the space industry too much, but yeah, I don't know why we haven't heard of it.
how much. So you kind of said like, oh, this is like basically a first for a private company, right?
Yep.
So how much? But you also mentioned something about how NASA was involved. So like, how much was NASA involved in this whole process? Because I understand, right? So SpaceX came in and helped gave basically the delivery vehicle, and then the final vehicle that actually landed the company. So what did NASA do?
Yeah, so the rocket that launched at SpaceX, the lander itself, Intuitive Machines, but a lot of the actual payloads on it, the scientific data gathering modules, were NASA
Ooh.
designed, slotted into this payload.
So NASA is basically the customer completely in this whole thing.
Yes. Yup. NASA kind of contracted out to these companies to help get their payloads to the moon. So, very, very interesting development there.
Yeah, I think that's really big actually, because like essentially, if this is possible that literally NASA can just be the customer, the big issue that a lot of people have with NASA always is the argument of, well, why should we be wasting our money doing this? You know, like why does NASA have to do all this stuff if we have like streets at home that, are not really like well maintained, or we can't pay off student loan debt and stuff like this? Well, this would save a lot of money for NASA, this whole deal. And it would actually pump a lot of money into, the hands of like small businesses, I guess, like we're seeing here.
Yeah, I was curious as to that as well because with NASA being the customer, they're still paying for this spot. So I didn't get to see the cost of the how much they paid to put their payloads on here. But at the end of the day, is it it does. My question would be: do we really sidestep that when we are still paying for, essentially paying for the development of this lunar module by sponsoring it to make it exist until how does innovative or Intuitive Machines make money besides NASA? Because if it's just NASA, I would argue, is it not still just uh, a NASA project veiled in private corporatism?
Well, no, the difference would be that, like, so NASA, right, isn't making like, the platform themselves, which are probably the most expensive component.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying, hey, look, we want these little ultra niche toys on here. So instead of us focusing on the really, really like extremely expensive parts, we let a contractor do it.
So kind of offloading the risk almost.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So like the riskier parts, which is what SpaceX, and I'm understanding this correctly, that this picture I'm seeing here with the flag, that is Innovative's thing. They make all of that except for components that are made by NASA.
Yes, that is their lander. Some of the modules on here, I assume, are NASA modules,
Yeah,
but yeah,
that's a huge win, because then like the expensive part is that part, and they basically have now probably made it something that's reusable. Well, maybe not reusable, but
at least have a
that,
platform that they a tested platform.
yeah,
Yeah. So
that's a joke.
I think it's
That is a
definitely a win for America. Back on the moon once again since the second space race, I'd call it. We're in first place.
yeah.
That being said, we have run out of time, so I will say we can continue this discussion down in comments. If anyone has any extrapolation they'd like to make on what we discussed, please drop it in the comments. We'd love to have discussion, and we'll see you guys next week on TBD Tech News, episode 4.